So I came about this news piece. I don't know if it's a news piece, but this week was weird because I was struggling. It was my birthday week. Things were kind of off. I took Sunday night off of work, and I was struggling to come up with anything. And it was one of those weeks where I thought, I think Tuesday, I don't know when, it might have been Wednesday morning, Tuesday. It had to have been Tuesday morning. Is that right? Monday night, Tuesday. Maybe it was Wednesday morning. One of the two. So I'm getting to the end of my shift, kind of looking at a blank. I use Google Keep to track my notes, and I'm looking at this blank Google Keep, and I was like, what am I going to talk about? I don't want to talk about the Iran war, and there really hadn't been too much news from the Iran war, so I was like, I really don't want to get into that. So what else could I talk about? I had nothing for the podcast feature. Again, I didn't want to repeat some old stuff, and I hadn't really been listening to new stuff. And I was like, what am I going to talk about? And so the way it works at my work is I go in at night, and then I leave in the morning, and there's a half an hour overlap in the morning between first shift and myself. And so first shift was coming in, and there's a gentleman who comes in and talks about all kinds of random stuff. He has kind of a religious background. I think he attends my parents' church. So every once in a while, he and I will just start talking about religious stuff. And usually, I don't initiate that stuff anymore. I just let it come to me if it comes to me. But so he comes in and he starts talking about dispensationalism like out of the blue. And I'm like, he's like, yeah, I watched a Tucker Carlson episode. I'm like, Tucker Carlson was talking about dispensationalism. Now, keep in mind, we did touch on this a little bit back in episode 7 of the Uncredible Podcast. I would encourage you to go back and check it out. I'll try to link that in the show notes as well. But I tried to just sort of dabble into it because it was the first time that I had ever heard anyone talk about dispensationalism outside of a seminary class or out of a church setting. And we'll get to this in a minute, but I had never... My concerns with dispensationalism have been basically ignored, both at a professional and a household level. We'll put it that way. When I was in master's degree seminary, I shouldn't say master's seminary because there's actually a seminary called that. When I was in seminary to get my master's degree, I was dealing with this at a collegiate master's theological level. And when I was pastoring a church, I was dealing with it like the small town, small church level where I was trying to kind of pull this out of like doctrinal statements and stuff, and was wildly unsuccessful at both because it had taken such a root in those churches and in those seminaries that I was the oddball out. It's one of the main reasons I don't pastor and I don't do church stuff anymore is because of this issue. I'll get into that a little bit more later. But out of nowhere, I'm having a conversation at work about dispensationalism. And I'm like, it's like, what is happening? Normal church folks, when I used to bring up dispensationalism, would immediately roll their eyes. Let me throw some terms at you for a minute. Eschatology, soteriology, hamartiology, bibliology, dispensationalism, Calvinism. These words, if you brought them up in a sermon, you could literally watch the eyes of people glaze over, and so we're talking about this and he mentions Tucker Carlson. I'm like, who is he talking to about dispensationalism? Because I'm like, I'm interested. I want to know. I'm delighted that this is coming up in public discourse because I was warning about this at a very small scale back in 2014, 2015, 2016, and nobody would listen. So I'm like, oh, so who's finally figuring this out? And he actually pulls up his phone because he couldn't remember. And he goes, he did an interview with J.D. Hall. And I'm like, you got that wrong. I was like, there's no way. I was like, that can't be true. But I'm at the end of my shift, so I have to leave. I have to punch out and leave. So I'm like, in the back of my head, I'm like, he can't mean the J.D. Hall that I interviewed back in 2015, could he? So I dig through and I pull it up, and it says Tucker Carlson, J.D. Hall, dispensationalism. Hold on. This is crazy. Play the episode. Sure enough, there's J.D. Hall on the Tucker Carlson show talking about dispensationalism. Now, it's like when you're trying to find something to talk about and it just falls in your lap, it's like, oh, perfect. So we'll throw things back a little bit to 2015. Back then, there was a lot of debate going on with some of the cultural issues politically. So homosexuality, abortion. Trying to think what other ones. Those were the two big ones. And there was a lot of conversation about it. And I know it was on the abortion issue that I think it was Focus on the Family was taking sort of a middle road on abortion. It was weird, man. It was one of these things where it was like, who are they trying to impress with this? I can't remember. It was sort of like, it was a really watered down version. Now, regardless of where you stand on abortion, it's like the middle ground people are the ones that disgust me the most, because it's like, pick a side, bro. Like, you can't walk the middle road. And that's what a lot of people do in order to seem, let me put it this way. That's what a lot of people do in order to get funding, right? They soft pedal their position so they can get funding for their nonprofit. That's the reality of what happens. So anyway, I interviewed JD because he was like, for whatever you might think about JD Hall, which most people probably don't think anything about him. I don't know how prominent he is now, but it was controversial for me to have him on there. But one thing I've always appreciated about JD is his willingness to say very explicitly, straightforward, what he's thinking and how he feels, and has well thought out positions. So like, he's not speaking from ignorance. He's thought things through, and excuse me. He's confident in what he believes. He might not always be right, but he doesn't soft pedal anything. And I've always appreciated that about him, but I thought he was gone from public life. Now, part of that's me just not dealing with church stuff anymore, but I thought he had been, removed from church, and I went back and I did some research, and he had. We'll talk about that in a little bit here, but here I am listening to JD Hall, and listen, he did a great job for the most part on Tucker's show, kind of giving we'll say a historical synopsis of how dispensationalism, at least one perspective of how dispensationalism took root in what he called low church, which I think is, I don't know, I don't know how you describe, sorry, I got something in my throat. I don't know how you describe small church culture. Baptist churches, Pentecostal churches, congregational churches, the ones that are on every corner, still surviving with 40 to 50 people supporting it, most of whom are elderly. They do their vacation Bible schools. I don't know how to describe it. Low church is fine. It's the opposite of highly organized, ritualistic, what you would think of with Catholic churches or Eastern Orthodox churches. Just people who show up and do church, So I don't know how you would describe that, but I think he did a good job kind of laying out how dispensationalism took root in America. The tricky thing about it was, as I'm listening to it, and I did some research and I looked it up, I was like, is JD really the best guy for this? Now, I want to avoid two things, because I think he made this mistake. I don't know if it was a mistake. I think it might have been time constraint. I'm not sure. But I want to avoid committing what is oftentimes called like either ad hominem or an attack on the person. I have always liked JD in general, mainly because of his boldness, and he's always been really good at describing historical, obscure historical figures. Like, just really good at that. In fact, towards the middle of my previous podcast, I was using a quote from JD, one of his sermons. I can't remember the name of the reformer. It was a Baptist reformer. It was a powerful message, and I was using it as part of my intro at the time. And I will say this, the whole idea of Uncredible came from as a small church pastor trying to reach out to big name popularized theologians and trying to get them on the podcast and just be complete. Like, you couldn't even have a conversation with these people online. There was just no access to them. That's really where I started interviewing regular people, because they were like too good or too far up the chain in order to deal with regular folk like me. And then I reached out to JD Hall, who in my mind was sort of in the mid tier of that. And he was like, yeah, I'll come on the podcast. So I've always appreciated that about him. And he went through a rough patch. I don't know. Maybe I'm soft pedaling that, but when I had him on my podcast, there was a major controversy surrounding it. And then it kind of went away because I walked away from it. I was like, I don't want to be accused of ad hominem or genetic, which is what I think fallacies, which ad hominem is when you attack the person, and genetic is when you attack the origins of a position, where it came from. So, because I think both of these mistakes were made in this interview, but all that to say, it's curious to me that Tucker chose JD Hall for this conversation. They must know each other somehow. JD was in Montana pastoring. I think I looked it up. I couldn't find anything off the cuff in terms of Tucker's connection with Montana, but somehow these guys got to know each other, because like in terms of like public life, I don't think JD Hall's out there, and now he is, which is fine. Whatever, good for him, right? Like, the thing is, JD Hall has a pretty tattered past, and we're going to talk a little bit about how that's going to affect the reception of his critique of dispensationalism, because people aren't going to listen to his critique of dispensationalism. They're going to attack him because of his past. Whether he sorted that out or not, I don't know. I went on Twitter, X, whatever, briefly to see what was going on, and this is what's happening. So JD Hall, if you look him up, just type in JD Hall scandal, you'll find that he was involved with, there was legal disputes, something to do with finances with his church, taking money from the church. I think he admitted all of it. I'm not sure. It wasn't pretty. Let's put it that way. And that happened maybe a year after I had him on my podcast. I don't regret to this day having him on the podcast, because I think what we talked about was good, but and I think it needed to be said. It would be well received now, but back then it was not well received, particularly in the Christian culture at the time. Maybe it wouldn't today, but anyway. So, like I said, the thing that was curious to me is why him, because he is fine in terms of his knowledge, ability to communicate, maybe a little conspiratorial, but anymore, that's like, if you're conspiratorial a little bit, you're probably right, kind of a thing. And I thought generally speaking, when I listened to the interview, he did a really good job. I find it curious that he's the one that, and maybe there's been other episodes of Tucker Carlson where he dove into this subject matter, but this is the first time I've heard of it. And more importantly, the type of person that this needs to influence in order to get them to stop this stuff, in order to take away the support of a nation that's doing things that might not be moral or ethical. Israel is who we're talking about there. It needs to reach these people, and one of those people, unprovoked by me, starts talking to me about this. And so that's good. Now, I thought it was odd that it showed up. Like I said, in episode 7, we talked a little bit about this as well. This dispensational thing was popping up on some smaller podcast news sites. So I addressed it there. And I think there's some good conversation to be had there. So check that out. But JD did a really good job. I think there's a lot of people who don't like him because of his past. There's a lot of people who I think might be jealous that he's the one that got chosen for this. They had to know each other, or maybe he reached out to Tucker. I don't know how they know each other, but listen, he did a good job explaining Darby and Schofield. So if you didn't listen to the podcast, go check it out. I personally, as somebody who, we'll talk about this in the main topic, but as somebody who has a background and who has studied at a theological level, dispensationalism, would not have started there. I'll explain why in a little bit. But I did learn something. So he talked a little bit about C.I. Scofield and his background, and I didn't know some of that stuff. And he's always had, like I said, JD has always had a particular gift at bringing these obscure historical figures in a bringing them forward and into the light in a compelling way. And I really appreciated the fact that he did it, from what I could tell, a fairly humble position, because Tucker, he made some comment about how Scofield was kind of like a low level type person, and maybe a sketchy guy. And Tucker was kind of trying to latch onto that, and he walked him back on that. And I thought that was admirable, because he also did not want to commit an ad hominem attack on Scofield. He was just trying to say he wasn't the best of guys to be associating with in terms of his morals and his ethics. And I don't think he meant that. I don't think Hall meant that in a way that was to discredit him because of that, but just to say, if you have a Scofield study Bible, you might be good to know the history behind the guy whose name is printed on it. In the same way, if you're people who are just for the first time interacting with J.D. Hall on the Tucker Carlson show would also do well to do the same. So that's just, use the logic. And I don't know what happened with JD since 2016, so maybe he's fully restored and he's fine. I don't know what his background is. I just, I think it's a weird setup where he does a really good job presenting an opposition position. And let me say this, I thought it was a really good follow-up to Tucker's interview with Huckabee. I kind of wish this interview had happened before he went to talk to Huckabee, because I think that would have been a more interesting conversation. I think Tucker missed a lot of things when he interviewed Huckabee because of his lack of knowledge of this subject matter. And that's not to say Tucker's dumb. Tucker Carlson is on a journey that happened, a theological journey that has already happened historically. He's figuring it out in real time, and it's weird, but he's in 2010, 2015 right now. He's getting there, but it's like he's on a spiritual journey. It's a healthy spiritual journey. He's questioning things in the way he should question them. And he's coming to what appears to be, Tucker's really good at asking questions too, but it appears to be he's beginning to understand some of the ins and outs of Protestantism, evangelicalism, and some of the theological shadiness that goes on there. So that's at least what it seems like in his moments of where he sounds himself. So what else do I have here? I also thought JD did a good job pointing out the correlation between evangelical theology, particularly in the dispensational premillennial viewpoints, and Israel politically. There is something going on there. I don't think it's as intentional or as conspiratorial as they implied. So a lot of the podcasts today that are doing news and stuff are really good at being like, oh, well, what does that mean? What could that possibly mean? Well, I think we know what it means. It's like, you're not saying it. Your Candace Owens, your any of these people who are doing, like, I don't want to say conspiratorial, but they're constantly like questioning things, sort of like a skeptical perspective on all things, never quite stating their conclusion, never quite proving anything, but never quite disproving anything, but just asking perpetual questions, which need to be asked, but also need to be answered in such a way that you have like some way of determining whether or not the person's right or wrong. So that sort of seemed like what was happening here. It's sort of like, was there like Israeli involvement in in perpetrating dispensational theology and inserting that into the Christian church? I'm telling you right now, there is no way. There is no way. I'll explain why in a minute. I'm sure they have leveraged it, but what is dispensationalism and the way it has taken root could not have been intentional. It could not have been. And I speak as somebody who was deeply, deeply involved with it while always questioning it along the way. So I think a lot of people, I would love to know JD's background with dispensationalism, because if you come to dispensationalism from the outside, you having never really been indoctrinated with it, you're going to have a different analysis of the thing. So, like, listening to JD talk, it seems to me like he has, for the most part, looked at dispensationalism as a student, as a critic, but never, maybe he has, but never really been with the people who at all levels taught it. I have not only been in the churches most of my life, I studied in the colleges. I got a master's degree, theological degree, in a seminary, in a dispensational school. I've seen it firsthand. And we're going to talk about some of the comments. We'll pull up some clips here in a bit. But it's not, if it is a lie, like, go back a couple episodes to where I talked about saying somebody's lying is a weird thing to say because you don't know their motives. You have to know that they know better. The idea that somebody is intentionally being deceptive is tough to prove. And I'm telling you that there probably are people who are leveraging dispensationalism theology, more to the point, evangelical theology, for their purposes. But I think the people who believe it actually believe it. For better or for worse, I think they actually have come to that conclusion. I'll explain a little bit in our main topic. But for the news portion of this, what I simply wanted to talk about was that this is in the news. That, look, Tucker Carlson's one of the number one podcasts. Him talking about this means it's going to get brought up in other shows. It's probably going to end up on Piers Morgan Uncensored. It's probably going to end up, I mean, it's already, I can see it's already hitting some of the Christian circles the way it used to, which is wild. Twitter, if you go down that road, it's like the embers were always there and all the same people are mad about it. I'll talk about that in a little bit too. But overall, just in terms of looking at Tucker's interview with J.D. Hall, overall, I think J.D. did a good general synopsis of historical dispensationalism. I say historical because I don't think he made it past Schofield in the conversation, which is unfortunate because I would have liked to have seen him do what I'm about to do, and talk about Charles Ryrie and he didn't talk about Clarence Larkin. He didn't talk about Ryrie and MacArthur, or he mentions Sproul and MacArthur, but doesn't really get into how modern dispensationalism is sort of very subtly inserted into most churches. He mentions it, but he doesn't explain how, and there's very few specifics. We're going to get into some of those specifics here for our main topic, but in terms of the news aspect, I just put in my notes, my uncredible take on this whole interview was, while I've always appreciated JD's candor, perspective, and willingness to incite, I use that specifically. I think his Substack has something to do with inciting, and it's perfect for him. I feel like the low-hanging fruit of JD's past makes this an easy target for ad hominem arguments, and it's already happening. Like, instead of taking JD Hall on in terms of the dispensational theological aspect, or defending dispensationalism, or coming up with reasons why JD was wrong, they're just dealing with his past or who he is as a person. So that's actually going to detract from what he says, because being opposed to dispensationalism is now going to associate you in a lot of people's minds with JD Hall. And here's the track that people are going to go down. This gentleman that came to hear this conversation for the first time was telling me things that I know for a fact 2 weeks prior he would have not said. It's saying things like, well, Israel, the Bible isn't the Israel of today. Like, I guarantee you, prior to hearing this conversation, if I had said that to him, he would have been like, oh, I don't know about that. But now that he hears J.D. Hall and Tucker Carlson say it, now here's the pathway. Then he's later going to find out about JD's past and go, oh, that guy might have been crazy, and he's going to fall right back into his old ways. That's why I don't know if, while JD did a great job, I don't know if he was the best spokesperson for it, but he's not the type of person to walk away either. I mean, if good can come from it, then let good come from it. I'm happy about that. But I do worry. It would have been nice if, again, I don't know what JD's public life has looked like since 2016, but what would have been really nice is if they had started out by talking about his past and how he's recovered, and maybe he has, and maybe that there's a cool story there, a redemption story there, which makes it make sense, to where he could have inserted that into this conversation. It didn't happen. So we don't know. I don't know. And I could dig into it, but this podcast is Uncredible. So I'll say this. It was nice to sit there and listen to somebody I had spoken to on a podcast 11 years ago. Is that right? 2015? Yeah, 11 years ago. And Tucker, he's on Tucker Carlson. Good for him in that respect. I hope that he continues to have the opportunity to speak, which I don't think a lot of people are saying. Like I said, I've always liked J.D. Hall. Appreciated his ministry. I know he went through some pretty rough things. He made some, I won't even say mistakes. He would, if I know J.D. Hall, he would not only say he made mistakes, but he did wrong. He knows it, and he's probably would argue that he repented of it and he's moved forward from there. That is the gospel. That is the Christian faith, is that we sin, we seek redemption in Christ, and we move forward. And if that's what he's done, and now he's being called on a decade or more later to discuss this issue, which has very real geopolitical ramifications. Lives are being lost. And if I know anything about JD, he cares about that. He really does. Like, that's not a joke. He cares about it. His heart, at least at that level, is in the right place. So that would be my assessment of JD Hall on Tucker Carlson.
No quit, no quit, no quit. Building their wall, while they talk about us, all they talk about us. Educated, experienced, still not credible. So we embraced it. Now we're uncredible.